Quiet now. Going to be talking about a movie tonight. A movie that many of you saw. One that was about a dream. A bad dream. Going down an alley. Hello everyone. So, tonight I'm going to be doing a video review of a little movie that I wanted to see back in December. And for a while I was ruling out hope of not seeing it in that month because Spider-Man was going around cannibalizing every single theater in town. Until last week, Lady Luck decided to smile upon me and deliver to me what I wanted. And that was a review, and that was a screening of Guillermo del Toro's Nightmare Alley. I was pretty excited about it, but at the same time I was also a little suspicious. Because director Guillermo del Toro is one of my all-time favorites. Pan's Labyrinth is without a doubt one of the best films I have ever seen in my entire life. And that's not even going into his full back catalog. I love the Hellboy movies. I love The Devil's Backbone. I love Kronos. I love Blade 2. Yes, I love Blade 2. I love Crimson Peak. I even really enjoy Pacific Rim. The only ones out of his filmography that I'm not fully on board with were Mimic, which, obvious reasons, that was a film that was heavily meddled on, and Shape of Water, which, despite being one of his most critically acclaimed projects and his big Oscar winner, I just couldn't get into. Something about it felt strangely rushed. Like, I was watching something where it's like, this is so his bag of material, but it never quite fully came together for me. And going into Nightmare Alley, I did have a bit of skepticism towards it because I still felt a little bit burned by Shape of Water, and on top of that, this is the first Guillermo del Toro movie without any of the fantastical elements that are typically in his films. There's no monsters, there's no science fiction elements, there's no fantasy, there's no weird things in it. It's pretty much a straight up realistic story with people where humans are the real monsters, which, to be fair, that is entirely Del Toro's wheelhouse. You look at something like Pan's Labyrinth, for example, and sure, everybody remembers the Pale Man, but the fascist captain in it was by far a more terrifying presence than the monster that ripped the heads off of fairies. But I was still interested in it because of the top shelf cast, and, it's a Del Toro movie. I ride or die with that man, regardless of how the movie turns out. He is a big, jolly dude. He's like what would happen if we crossed Steven Spielberg with Tim Burton, and if he were Mexican. And I'd argue I think I pretty much like Del Toro more than Burton and Spielberg. But coming out of this, I was honestly delighted with it. This is, not only do I think that this is a better film than his past couple of movies, it's better than Pacific Rim. It's better than Crimson Peak. It's better than Shape of Water. It was also, for me, maybe my favorite Del Toro since Blade 2. I know it's kind of an odd comparison, but something about watching Nightmare Alley really hit a specific note for me. Now, if you're wondering what the film is about, it takes place somewhere between the end of the 1930s and into the 40s about a wannabe carny played by Bradley Cooper who's just going around place to place, spot to spot, trying to scrounge enough money to make a living. And one day he ends up coming across a carnival that's offering good work and pay and shelter and all that good stuff. He gladly accepts the job, and along the way, he winds up coming across other carnies who basically practice mentalism, like people who pretend to be psychics. He starts learning the tricks of the trade, gets involved with a girl whose main gimmick is that she is the electric girl, played by Rooney Mara. But as he continues his little grift of being a faux psychic, things start getting complicated. A psychologist, who's played by Cate Blanchett, comes in his orbit and not only tries to seduce him, but also get him involved in a long con scheme with one of her clients, a wealthy businessman who's desperately seeking to be reconnected with his wife and believes that Bradley Cooper's character could be the one who could help him out. But is Cooper really a partner in crime with Cate Blanchett's character, or is he just another con? And for 2.5 hours, this movie winds up being what I almost want to call the meanest movie Guillermo del Toro has ever made, which is saying something, because when you look at some of his movies, especially his R-rated material, he can be a very cruel man. But the difference between what goes on in Nightmare Alley versus what happens in his other movies is that even in his other movies, at their darkest, there is still a sense of empathy and humanity to what is happening to the characters, even as they're in prolonged suffering. From the children at the orphanage at the end of The Devil's Backbone, to what happens to Ophelia at the end of Pan's Labyrinth, to the fate of the Sharp siblings at the end of Crimson Peak. Even as things get incredibly gruesome and horrible and horrifying, or tragic, or disturbing, or whatever, there is always a sense that Del Toro does care for a lot of people and their pain and suffering on screen. This movie, on the other hand, wow. I couldn't believe that Del Toro had something this mean in him. This is a movie where even the nicest characters, in some way, shape, or form, are some kind of grifter, or a liar, or a cheat, or a steal. And the more the movie goes on, the darker things get, until it eventually culminates in a climax that is just like a complete violent clusterfuck of things going wrong, left and right, up and down, side to side. And to say nothing of the film's particularly dark ending, which I do not want to spoil, but for those who have seen it, Bradley Cooper's final scene, I mean, it is at once pitiful, my apologies, it is at once pitiful and yet kind of darkly funny. To see the final fate that is bestowed upon this character, upon Stan Carlston. I was having a hard time trying to figure out how the hell Stan's name is pronounced, but to see this fate befall Bradley Cooper's character at the end of the story was like one of those kind of things where it's like, you're just kind of like, in any other situation, maybe if you were a better person, I'd feel sorry for you, but in this case, no. There's other things to take into account here. Like any other Guillermo del Toro movie, it looks like $1 million. Del Toro was given around $60 million to work with here, and he uses it to the full extent, creating incredible set design and visuals and costumes and CG effects and all these neat little things he does. And the cast that's been assembled here is by far and away the best cast I've seen for a Guillermo del Toro movie. Outside of the aforementioned two leads I just said, we also have Rooney Mara, Richard Jenkins, Toni Collette, David Strathairn, Ron Perlman, obviously, Willem Dafoe. There's even appearances by Tim Blake Nelson and... who was the last dude? And Jim Beaver, who, another Guillermo regular at this point, in this. And just, and also Mary Steenburgen's also in this. Can you believe the amount of names I'm listing off here? I'm sure there's probably other faces I didn't recognize, but I was still like, oh my god, I can't believe how incredible this cast is. I was actually reading some reviews that said that everybody was miscast here. I fully disagree. I was thinking to myself, no, everyone's perfect here. I can't think of another movie Del Toro has made where the casting was just so on point. Even before this movie, I would say probably his best cast movie was Shape of Water, but even that pales in comparison to what we see here. There's other things I can also take into account here. Like, unfortunately, Guillermo couldn't get Alexandre Desplat to come back and do the music like he did for Shape of Water due to COVID-related issues. Instead, he got Nathan Johnson to do the I almost said screenplay, the score for this, who also did the music for Knives Out just a couple years later, and he gives us a score that is right alongside anything that would fit right in Guillermo del Toro's filmography. And despite the 2.5 hour running time, I didn't feel it at all. This thing did not drag for me. I was even surprised to see that people thought that the first hour was really slow in comparison to the other half of the movie, but to me, all the stuff at the carnival flew by relatively quickly. What I almost kind of view the movie like is that it's sort of a culmination of what Guillermo's been experimenting since Crimson Peak. There's been an obvious kind of shift in his style starting with that movie. When you look at something like Crimson Peak, and then you compare it to something like Pan's Labyrinth, or even the Hellboy movies, or Pacific Rim, you can tell that they're by the same filmmaker, but there's a subtle shift in sensibilities and camera movement and other aspects of what he's working with. And it almost kind of feels like watching Nightmare Alley feels like the best of both worlds to come from Crimson Peak and Shape of Water. You want the period setting, specifically that of like 1940s, 50s, 60s Americana. You want the more realistic aspects of a story bleeding into something that is fantastical. You got that. You also have something that really takes its time. In comparison to Crimson Peak and Shape of Water, which, as much as I love Crimson Peak, I will concede that it does kind of rush through things a little bit quickly. And that was a problem that was even greater amplified in Shape of Water. I apologize once again for saying bad things about Shape of Water. Nightmare Alley wonderfully takes its time. That extra half hour really gives the movie a lot of time to breathe and to truly build up. There's a lot of other things I could praise here, but if you can somehow catch this movie, from what I understand, HBO Max and Hulu is now streaming this. It just premiered today. If you haven't watched it already, go for it. Or if you're lucky and you have a theater playing it nearby, go for it, which is how I saw it. And here's the kicker. The theater I went to that was playing this, it's this little like theater slash restaurant chain thing called Smitty's. They're fine. Not only did they get Nightmare Alley, but they also got the black and white cut, which is called what is the name of it? Visions of Light and Darkness, I think that's what the cut is called, where the entire film becomes black and white. And I must confess, after watching it, I was thinking to myself, I don't think I can watch this movie any other way. I do really want to watch this again, but only until the black and white cut is released, because that is how I was introduced to it. Once that black and white version is properly released, and I really hope we get a Blu-ray of it, because I know that Nightmare Alley is going to be getting a Blu-ray in a couple of months, towards the end of March, and Guillermo del Toro has Guillermo del Toro has stated that the black and white version will be available to watch in the future, probably a few months down the line. Hopefully we get some kind of special edition that includes both versions, because I would love to sit down and watch this version to my heart's content. One of the reasons why I made this video was because I decided to kind of go against some things I said earlier. When I did my top 25 of the year, I was originally going to leave it alone, but then I saw West Side Story, and I changed that. I put that on there. And then I saw this, and I had to put this movie on here. So take this video as a sort of additional note in my honorable mentions in my top 10 video. If you look at my 25, this film is like right at number 13, wedged in between the Val Kilmer documentary and Army of the Dead. And I'm happy to have it there. This is a wonderful film. This is one of Guillermo's best in quite some time. If you can watch it any way possible, go for it. It is a goddamn delight. Shame it didn't do so well in its initial run, but like a lot of Guillermo del Toro movies that unfortunately bomb at the box office, they always get better appreciated in time. It sucks that that guy can't get a genuine hit. The only genuine hits he's had in his career were Devil's Backbone, Pan's Labyrinth, Blade 2, and The Shape of Water. He just seems to be eternally cursed. I don't Kid. This man is one of their greatest entertainers. Like, just, what the hell? And he's big and jolly and imaginative. Well, at least we won't have to worry about box office this year for his next project, his upcoming stop-motion animated musical adaptation of Pinocchio set in fascist Italy. Now, that'll be something. Anyway, hope all of you have a good evening, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.